Snow fell the way it only ever did in the high country, not in a hurry, not in anger, but with a patience that felt eternal. Each flake drifted down like a whispered decision, settling on branches already bowed with white, softening the hard lines of rock and pine. The mountain breathed slowly beneath it all, ancient and indifferent. Elias Boone moved through that silence as if he belonged to it. His boots broke the crusted snow with a steady rhythm learned over decades. He didn't rush. Rushing got men killed up here. His shoulders were broad beneath his heavy coat, its fur lining darkened with age and weather. His beard was threaded with gray, his face carved by wind, sun, and solitude. The mountain had shaped him the way water shaped stone, without asking permission. He had gone up the ridge that morning to check his traps and make sure the winter hadn't torn loose the path near the old pass. He wasn't expecting to see anyone. No one sane climbed this high once the snow settled in earnest. That was why the figure ahead made him stop. At first he thought it was a shadow, one of those tricks the snow sometimes played when light and storm tangled together. But the shape didn't move with the wind. It stood still, upright, impossibly human. Elias narrowed his eyes and took another step. A woman. She stood at the bend where the pine trail narrowed into a single-file path, the drop-off hidden beneath drifts that could swallow a man whole. She wore a dark dress, wool but thin, and a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Snow dusted her hair and clung to her lashes like frost-bitten stars. She wasn't crying. She wasn't waving for help. She simply stood there, as if waiting for something to either claim her or let her pass. Elias felt his instincts rise, sharp and sudden. People didn't wander into the high mountains in winter by accident. They came running from something, or they came because they had nowhere else to go. He approached slowly, keeping his steps measured, making sure she heard him before he got too close. "You'll freeze," he said when he was a few paces away. His voice sounded louder than he expected, rough from disuse. The woman turned at the sound, and when she did, Elias felt something tighten in his chest. She was young. Not a girl, but not yet hardened by time either. Her face was pale from the cold, but it wasn't fear that marked her expression. It was grief, deep, settled, the kind that had stopped screaming and learned to sit quietly inside a person. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, but Elias heard the thinness beneath it, like ice stretched over moving water. She was cold. Dangerously so. Without thinking, he shrugged his coat off his shoulders. The cold bit immediately at his skin, sharp and familiar. He stepped forward and held it out to her. "Take this." She looked at the coat as though it was something far heavier than fur and cloth. Her gaze flicked up to his face, searching, weighing. Then she shook her head. "No." The word stopped him cold. No. He hadn't heard that response in years, not up here. Not from someone standing knee-deep in snow, with winter closing in. "I won't take it," she said, clearer now. "I can't." Elias frowned. "You won't make it another hour dressed like that." "I will," she replied. "I've learned how." There was no defiance in her tone, only certainty. It unsettled him more than anger would have. He studied her more closely then. Her hands were bare, red and trembling, despite the way she kept them clenched at her sides. Her posture was upright, disciplined, as if she were holding herself together by will alone. This wasn't foolishness. This was pride, the quiet, unyielding kind. "I'm Elias," he said at last, lowering the coat but not putting it back on. "And you're already freezing." She hesitated, just a fraction. "Clara," she answered. "And I know." The snow thickened around them, the sky dimming as clouds pressed lower against the peaks. Elias could feel the storm shifting, deepening. Night would come early. "Take the coat," he said again, more gently this time. Clara's gaze dropped to it. Her jaw tightened. "I won't take something I can't repay," she said. "And I won't be a burden to a stranger." The words landed heavier than the snow. Elias had known many kinds of people, desperate men, greedy men, broken men. But this was different. This was someone who had lost too much already and refused to lose herself with it. Something moved inside him then, not pity, not desire, respect, a sharp, surprising recognition. He stepped closer anyway and draped the coat over her shoulders. careful as if handling something fragile. For a moment she didn't resist. He thought he had won. Then she slipped out of it, folding it with clumsy, cold stiff fingers and pressing it back into his hands. "I'm grateful," she said, meeting his eyes, "but I won't." The snow whispered between them, filling the silence. Elias felt the cold creep deeper into his bones, but he barely noticed. His attention was fixed on her, on the way her breath came slower now, controlled, deliberate. On the way, she stood her ground without raising her voice. He had lived alone long enough to forget what it felt like to be challenged in this quiet way. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Down," she said. "Anywhere that isn't behind me." He didn't ask what lay behind her. The mountain had taught him that some answers weren't his to demand. "Trail gets dangerous after this bend," he said. "Snow hides the edge." "I know." Of course she did. Elias exhaled slowly. "Then at least let me walk you down," he said. "No coat, no debt, just company." Clara studied him again, longer this time. The mountain man with weathered hands and eyes that didn't linger where they shouldn't. A stranger. Yes, but not an unkind one. The wind rose, sending a swirl of snow between them. At last she nodded. They turned and began walking together, side by side but not touching, their footsteps falling into a shared rhythm. The storm closed around them, erasing their tracks almost as soon as they were made. Elias felt it then, quietly, undeniably. In refusing his coat, she had done something no one else ever had. She had made him see her, and as the mountain watched in silence, something new took root in the cold. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had settled thick and heavy over the mountain. The sky was bruised purple and grey, the kind of color that promised more snow before morning. The wind pushed harder now, testing the trees, pressing drifts against the low timber. Walls of Elias's home, as if the mountain itself were curious about the woman he had brought back with him. The cabin stood where it always had, quiet, stubborn, half buried in white. Smoke had long since faded from its chimney, but the structure remained solid, built by hands that trusted wood more than words. Elias pushed the door open, the hinges groaning softly. "Come in," he said. Clara hesitated at the threshold. Snow clung to the hem of her dress, melting into dark patches. She looked around as if expecting the place to judge her. Inside, the cabin was spare but warm in spirit. Rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars and tools, a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. The scent of pine, smoke and iron hung in the air. It was the home of a man who needed little and trusted what he had. Elias shut the door against the wind and crossed to the stove. His movements were practiced, efficient. He struck a match, coaxed flame to life, fed it until the iron began to tick softly with heat. Clara stood near the door, rubbing her hands together, her breath still faintly visible. "You can sit," he said, nodding toward the chair. She did, careful as though afraid to take up too much space. Elias poured water into a battered kettle and set it over the fire. When it boiled, he added dried herbs, mountain mint, something sharp and clean. He poured the tea into a tin cup and set it in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it, fingers trembling now that she no longer had to pretend strength. When the warmth seeped into her palms, her shoulders sagged just slightly and she closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "It wasn't just for the tea." Elias knew that. He nodded but said nothing. For a while they sat in silence, the only sounds the wind outside and the quiet crackle of the stove. The storm pressed closer, snow tapping against the window like impatient fingers. "You live alone up here?" Clara asked at last. "I do." "How long?" Elias considered. "Long enough that I stopped counting." She nodded, understanding more than his words revealed. "My husband died last winter," she said suddenly. The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. Elias did not look away. He did not interrupt. "An avalanche," she continued, her voice steady but distant. "We were gathering firewood near the lower pass. I told him the snow didn't feel right. He laughed. Said I worried too much." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "He never heard it coming." The stove popped softly. Outside, the wind howled. "Everyone said I should leave the mountains," Clara went on. "Said the place would only remind me of him. But grief isn't tied to land. It follows you, sleeps beside you, breathes when you breathe." Elias felt the truth of that settle deep. He had buried his own losses under years of solitude, but they were still there, layered like old snow beneath new. "I didn't want to be rescued," Clara said quietly. "That's why I wouldn't take your coat." Elias looked at her then. "I figured as much. When everything is taken from you once," she said, lifting her gaze to meet his, "you learn to stand on your own. Even when it hurts, especially then." The firelight caught in her eyes, and for the first time, Elias saw something beyond grief, resolve, strength sharpened by pain. "You didn't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's what made it harder." Silence returned, but it was different now, less guarded, more open. Elias felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not a rush, not a spark, but a slow, steady warmth. Respect, first and foremost, and something growing quietly beneath it. "You can stay here tonight," he said at last. "Storm won't let up before morning." No debt, no burden. Clara studied him, truly studied him this time. The broad shoulders marked by labor, the careful way he kept his distance. The man who offered shelter without expectation. "All right," she said. Elias took an extra blanket from the shelf and set it near the bed. "You take the bed," he added. "I'll sleep by the fire." She hesitated, then nodded again. "Thank you." As night deepened, the storm sealed them in, snow piling high against the door. The cabin grew warmer, quieter. Clara lay beneath the blanket, staring up at the rough wooden ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of Elias's breathing from across the room. For the first time in months, the ache in her chest eased. Not gone, but lighter. Elias watched the fire die down, his thoughts restless. He had lived alone so long that companionship felt almost dangerous. And yet the presence of this woman, her strength, her refusal to be pitied, had stirred something, he thought. The mountain had long since frozen away. She had refused his coat in the snow, and in that refusal, she had reminded him what it meant to see someone not as a thing to save, but as an equal standing against the storm. Outside, the mountain kept its vigil. Inside, something quiet and real had begun.